You're listening to Searching for More, a podcast of the Diocese of Arlington. On this episode, Bob and Bev Ward share the secret to their 55-year marriage and how they choose love every day.
The purpose of marriage is to get yourself, your spouse, your children and grandchildren, etc., to heaven. And that takes precedent over everything.
Hear about Bob's 26 years in military service with the U.S. Army and how a young girl who had hopes of becoming a cloistered nun fell for the young hotshot. This episode's host is Billy Atwell, Chief Communications Officer of the Diocese.
Bob and Bev, thank you so much for joining me here on the podcast.
It's our pleasure.
Thank you for asking.
So let's start in the beginning. How did you all meet?
Well, my father's in the Foreign Service, and I was in college, and I traveled back to Europe by boat every summer because the State Department did that in those days. And I'd been over many times, so I was sort of organizing a lot of the young people. And we were having a good time, and suddenly this woman comes up, and she introduces me to her daughter, who was very embarrassed, had just graduated high school. And so she just wanted her to meet the young people that were having a good time on the ship. So we met, and we dated on the boat, and then she came to Ireland, where my parents were stationed, and we went out one time. And then later this summer, I decided, well, I'll go over and take her out to dinner in Paris. So I sort of got to very interested in this young woman who happened to be from Nebraska. So my senior year, I was very serious about it. When I graduated from as my graduation from college, I was in ROTC, and they said, where would you like to be stationed? I was a distinguished military cadet. And I said, what's the closest place to Lincoln, Nebraska? And they said, Fort Riley, Kansas. And
How many guys are probably asking to go to Fort Riley,
That's right. I said, but they said no one ever asked to go there. I said, that's where I want to go. To make a long story short, I graduated, got in my car, drove out there, reported in, middle of the week, first Saturday, drove to Lincoln, Nebraska, 110 miles away, and I got that wonderful message, I think we're too serious. I'm just a sophomore at college. I don't want to date you anymore. Thank you very much. So I jumped in my car, drove back to Fort Riley, and my commander, I was a lieutenant, my company commander said to the lieutenants, there's a formal dinner dance coming up next Saturday, and you will bring dates. So I had an order, and I went to there was a post exchange, which is like a 7-Eleven up in the troop area, and Beverly was working there. And everybody in my bachelor officer quarter had asked her out, and she turned them all down. Well, anyway, make a long story short, I asked her out. She turned me down like 3 times in a row because she was from an Army town, and good girls didn't date soldiers.
Oh, I see, yeah.
So then
true. Tell
him what you saw, what happened, how...
Well, but the interesting thing is I grew up from the time I was, I went to 12 years of Catholic school, and I think probably by the time I was in the 3rd or 4th grade, I had decided I wanted to be a nun.
Cloistered.
A cloistered nun, not one that was teaching
out
in
in the
school,
world, yeah.
because I would read saint books all the time. So I drove my parents crazy wanting to go. My best friend entered the St. Joseph's group in the 10th grade, and my father said, no, you're going to have to graduate from school. Well, the priest that was in charge, Monsignor Kyogan, really took a liking to me, and he wanted me to come back and teach for him because I wanted to be a teacher originally. And he said he got me a scholarship to Merrimack College in Salina, Kansas. Okay. So my dad said, when you graduate there, if you still want to be a sister, you want to go and be a nun, a cloistered nun, I will take you. Well, it was my sophomore year. I just finished my sophomore year in college, and my best friend, her father owned a filling station on the side of a highway, and in that was a little store and post office. So she came to spend the summer so we could get a job. Well, my town was very small, and I'd never been out of Junction City, Kansas. So my dad said, well, nobody would hire us. So he said, well, you could take a civil service test and work on the post. You'll make more money.
Oh.
So we went ahead, took the civil service test, and then we both got hired to work in this, PX, post exchange, and that's where Bob and I met. But
what was your first impression of when you met him? So you said good girls didn't date soldiers, but when you met him, what did your?
I stopped her coming across the.
I'd left the cash register because I had nobody
store
there. Yeah.
And asked her where I could find a can opener.
Okay.
And I was standing in front of a bin of 300 can openers. I mean, it was right there. So her impression was...
I looked at him and I thought he was cute. And then when he asked me about the can openers, and I said, well, they're right there. Then I thought, well, he's not too swift.
Right.
So I turned around, I walked off, and then he said, excuse me, can I ask you something else? And I'm thinking to myself, now what, And he said, I just got in town and I have been ordered to go to a dinner dance. And I looked at him like, yes, like, what does that have to do with
Right.
me? And he said, and I just thought, I wondered if you'd go with me. And I said, well, I don't date soldiers. And then he looked so pathetic.
Oh.
And I felt so bad because he looked so pathetic. And then he said, but I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know anyone. And I said, well, my best friend is here for the summer. And I said, first of all, I don't think my parents would let me go out with you. And second of all, you'd have to get a double that she'd have to go too. You'd have to get somebody for her.
And I'd
He
have
said-
to meet her parents.
And he said,
Yeah.
I'll do that. And I said, well, you can come over to our house, but, my father and mother may say no. And he said, okay, I'm willing to do whatever. But I could get a date. Don't worry, I can get a date for her. So,
You're a bold and determined man, Bob.
I was. It's all part of God's plan.
and I thought he was cute, but I thought, he's not quite, all there.
You stand in front of the can openers and yet can't find them. That's
right.
How many times does that come up in marriage, right? It's like, honey, where is... It's like, it's in your hand. That's
right.
I've been in that position. So,
But
obviously...
one little aspect of that is when we came back from the date, her father said, you will have them home by 10 o'clock or I'll have the police after you. So I got them
Yes.
at
Yeah.
9:55.
He did.
So
got
Beverly
us
walked in
home
the
early.
house, and what happened?
And my father said, so how did it go? And I said, you won't believe it. And he stood up. He said, what did he do? And I said, nothing. And he said, what do you mean? And I said, I think that's a man I'm going to marry.
Wow.
And my dad said, Sister Bev, because I had driven him nuts all those years. And that's what I was called the rest of my life, my married life. As long as my dad was alive, I was
Sister
known
Bev.
as Sister Bev.
And it
That's
took me
great.
2 years to figure it out, but we were very happy finally after I came around and realized that was the person I should marry to.
I had a similar experience. I was discerning the priesthood for a long time, and I just resolved in my mind, okay, you know what? I don't know if I should go to seminary or not. And it had been too long. I said, you know what? Lord, if you want me to marry someone, introduce me to her in the next few weeks. Otherwise, I'm applying to seminary. Because I had friends that went to seminary, and I knew kind of when you needed to apply to make it to the next year. I said, you got 3 weeks. And I met my wife like a week and a half later. Actually volunteering for the Arlington Diocese. So through youth ministry, we're volunteering. So obviously the courtship went well. You two got married. And Bob, I hear that your the best man speech at the wedding was memorable. Tell me about that.
It's another one of those amazing coincidences. As I said, grew up in the Foreign Service, and for some reason, as a lieutenant, I was nominated to be an aide to a brand new brigadier general in the 1st Infantry Division, and he selected me. And so when we got engaged, and then we got ready for the wedding, I went to the general and I said, "Well, sir, I don't know who I should invite. The guys from the unit, sure, but he said, well, invite everybody you work with." I said, "Okay." So I invited the division staff. So we had one 2-star general, one 1-star general, several full colonels, a whole bunch of lieutenant colonels and majors. And my best man was a platoon leader with me in the unit, and he had never been around anybody higher than a captain, one rank above lieutenant. He was petrified. For the toast, he had to make a toast, very simple, and he practiced. And this actually happened. It wasn't rehearsed. He said over and over in his mind, "Ladies and gentlemen, I propose a toast to Bob and Beverly." What he actually said was, "Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to propose a toast to Bobberly." And he did not mean to say that. It was totally off his nervousness.
I guess
But that
becoming
became
one in
our label.
marriage?
That
Yeah.
was it. We became, when we got ready to leave, our car was, Bobberly was painted all over it. We
Oh,
came back
that's
from a
funny.
honeymoon. Bobberly was on the mirrors in our house. And so we've been known as the Bobberlys ever since. And it was all from a misspoken toast.
Yeah.
But as you said, it truly is what happened, two people becoming one. And it was a wonderful handle to have for the rest of our life.
Yes. So that was kind of the front end of your military career, though. You were in the military for 26 years.
26
is that right?
years, correct.
Yeah. So Bev, let me ask you first, actually, from your perspective, how did the military life and being married to a military officer, how did that impact, you think, the dynamics of marriage for you all?
It was really interesting for me in the respect he had always traveled. I never had. I hadn't really been out of Kansas. And I really did enjoy meeting the people and going to different states and going different places. I liked the post. It turned out for me to be a very wonderful job. Now, it was hard when he went to Vietnam. He went to Vietnam twice.
Wow.
I was pregnant the first time he left, and the second time we had a 2-month-old. And then after we had one short tour, and then they sent him unaccompanied to Korea. That was hard. And my parents, I'm an only child. My parents couldn't have any more children. And what happened was my dad, we were able to talk on the phone, and my dad said, if you can find an apartment or place for them to stay, I will pay to send them over, the 2 children and me.
Wow.
And so Bob said yes. Well, my life, all of my life, I have gone to daily mass. So I would take a cab every day from the apartment that we were living in and go onto the post to get to mass. And the priest, after a week or 2, noticed me there all the time. And then he asked me if I would come and teach CCD for him. And I said I would. And then we got to be very close friends. And I'd have him over to the house for dinner. And that was really, for Bob, in way over 10 years, he never asked me anything about the church. We went to mass both Sundays, to both churches. But
Every Sunday.
when this priest came, then Bob asked him questions and then decided to become a Catholic in Korea.
Yeah, because Bob, you weren't Catholic, obviously,
No,
when you met. Your father was a minister. Is
No,
that
my
right?
grandfather was a
grandfather?
minister. My uncle was a minister. Cousin, I went to the Methodist, and I went to a Baptist college. When we were in Geneva, Switzerland, the only English-speaking church was Anglican, so I was confirmed in the Anglican church. So I figure whoever's right, I've been in their camp at one point or another.
Yeah.
But it was something that we almost didn't get engaged for fear we couldn't resolve these differences, because I love Protestants. My family was Protestant to the end, and I have great respect and admiration. But for some reason, all of us seem to have gotten a misunderstanding of what Catholicism is all about. And most of us have the same experience. Scott Hahn wrote a wonderful book about that, and when I read it, it was my story. It was the same.
I've heard a lot of people say that
So
about that
so it was a wonderful challenge to get through that. And you'd ask about how we got through the difficulties in the military. Well, first of all, the military career, 2 things I want to mention about that, is a way of life more than a job.
Right.
And it becomes a way of life for your family. And the community supports you. When we deploy, the fort takes care of the spouses, and you know that. There's comfort in the community. So it's a wonderful career, but the separation is what makes it difficult. And so we were able to keep close in the day before all these modern technologies through snail mail. Mm-hmm. So we wrote every day, and I just think back of the irony that we couldn't get, often I didn't have paper. So if I was in the field and I needed to send a letter or something to Beverly, I would take the top of the C ration box, cardboard box, and just tear that triangle out,
Wow.
write free, put the address, and write a postcard, and give it to some door gunner on a helicopter who landed to bring us water or something. And somehow, miraculously, it would get to Beverly, and she would write every day, and they would fly over in a helicopter if they couldn't land and drop a sandbag with all the mail in it. So we kept together in that way,
Yeah.
which made it possible.
But I was going to say, even when we were separated there for
The first
a while,
7 months before we got
7 months
engaged.
before we got engaged, and he would write to me then, and I realized I could not read his writing at all. I just had to pretend
no,
I
how
knew what he
frustrating.
My
said.
handwriting's like doctors.
Do you still have those letters?
We do.
That's good, because I was thinking about,
we
as you're
have
talking about
boxes
it,
of letters.
I was thinking about, that was part of the legacy that was left by President H.W. Bush, right? George Bush.
Right.
And his wife, that they communicate through war and so on, through those letters, and how much that means to their children and their grandchildren and great-grandchildren.
Nobody could read his writing.
Yeah, well, you could put like a caption on the bottom for it to have it translated.
But
Go ahead.
can I interrupt?
Yeah, sure.
And one thing I was going to say is, once we decided that we would get married, actually, one of the things that we did, we ended our dates on saying an Our Father at the end.
Yeah, every day.
And we continued doing that after we got married. So every night before we went to bed, we would say the Our Father before we hopped
Because it was the
in bed.
one prayer in common as
Yeah.
a Protestant, as Catholic. It was a beautiful way. Now our prayer life is very extended because.
Yeah.
But I've been a Catholic for 45 years.
How did that, for you, enrich the marriage to be on the same page with regard to such important, issues that separate Catholics from Protestants?
One of the things I wanted to mention from that point of view is you do not have to both be Catholic to have a successful marriage.
Right. Right.
What I learned in the 45 years since I've been in the Catholic Church is that everything I was as a Methodist is still available, but there's so much more to Catholicism, and it's that expanded part, the theology and the 2,000 years of history and tradition, and all of that that's made it so rewarding. So I think we've grown together in our faith. It turns out, after my military career, I decided to go back to graduate school because I was so excited about the faith. And I came home and announced that we are going to graduate school. That was not something she had anticipated. But she wanted to audit, and I said, you won't learn anything. So we did. We both went to Notre Dame Graduate School and got our master's in theology. And my discipline became Scripture, and Beverly's was spirituality with a great saint. So all the way along, as I studied, as I learned, we were doing it together. And it's helped us to grow in our faith experience by doing that together. And she sort of relearned, having gone 12 years to school, what I was learning as a new Catholic, particularly when we got to graduate school. And I think that's helped our marriage. And of course, marriage being a sacrament has given us the graces to get through the hard times. And I'm not saying that if you don't have a sacramental marriage, you can't get through hard times, but it's certainly easier when you're falling back on your faith, when you're falling back on the church, when you know there are people like priests that can help you. And it's just so much fuller. And I think it's helped us immensely in raising the children Catholic. We grew as we taught them. So,
And I think that was the most important thing that happened when he became Catholic. Our oldest one was in the 2nd grade, and the youngest one was in kindergarten. At that time, we just had 2. And I can remember he got so excited about learning the rosary. And because of his excitement, he'd take out maps and say, this is where Mary went to go visit her cousin. And he got the kids really excited. Well, the interesting thing is, we would always say a rosary every evening after dinner. And now our children, our grown children, did that with their children. And now whenever we get together for vacation, the grandchildren all lead the rosary for us.
How good does that make you feel as parents to see that passed down?
It is.
I mean, that's the goal of every parent.
Truly
It is.
wonderful.
Faith to be
It really
transmitted
is.
that way.
And in that line, I'm not making a generalization, but from my experience, the role of the father is critical in passing the faith on to the children. There's some wonderful mothers, and we've met many of them that are devout to their faith and done everything. But the father wasn't either interested or involved, and a child will grow up with the idea, well, if it's not important to dad, how important is it?
Yeah.
So I want to say to all the young dads out there, you will be amazed how important your role is in sharing the faith, participating in faith. I taught CCD, and my kids all went through our classes. And then later, we started doing everything as a couple. We taught CC together, 11th and 12th grade, for about 5 years. And that just reinforced to their children the importance of the faith. And I think that's why they're there. And my children are now teaching CCD. Our daughter just became a DRE. Our youngest son was also a DRE before that. And we were too at the new parish. So it's just wonderful to see the role that the father has, and especially if the mother's also very active.
Mm-hmm. We had asked some folks on leading up to this interview, what is your, we're interviewing a couple who's been married for 55 years and so on. What's your question for them? One of them was from a woman, Brietta, who asked, what's the key to a successful marriage? So when you look back over 55 years, is there something you can point to and you say, boy, if you have nothing else, this is a fundamental you got to have? Maybe you can each pick one. There we go.
Well, one of the things I want to say before that, I'm meaning to say this. This idea of vocation versus your career.
Right.
My career was 26 years. I was a contractor for 8 years, but my vocation's 55 years and still working.
Yeah.
So people don't realize that when you're young and you're in a career and you're competing, and the military is very competitive, and everything is very exciting, and then suddenly, at age 48, my career was over. What am I going to do? And it turns out that there's a whole second life that's fuller and more exciting. And actually, after I've finished working for pay, my greatest joy now is to working in the church. We teach the RCIA, and I teach Bible study. And it's just a joy. I get up every day and work on Bible study to be able to teach it in my parish. And I think God has been so good to bless us with things well beyond the career image and the money-making image and that to what's truly important, which is still having an active day when you're older and still working on your vocation when you're older. Mm-hmm. But what would you say is the most important?
Well, I think one of the most important things, and we sort of made up our minds doing that when we first got married, is never to go to bed angry with each other. If we had a situation where we were in conflict, we would work it out. Sometimes we stayed up very, very late to work it out, but I really believe that we needed to say, "Be our Father" before we went to sleep, but we also, in order to do that, we had to go ahead and not go to bed angry
be
with
at peace
each
with
other.
one another.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think we did it pretty good most of the time. There may have been occasional.
Couple nights you just didn't go to sleep at all.
Yeah, sometimes, yeah. But I would add to that, and you alluded to the same thing, it's prayer. A successful marriage is based on faith. Marriage, just like anything else, should be seen, or anything that important, as a triangle. So it's Beverly and I and Christ. And he can be at the apex, you can see it that way, or he could be the base, and then we could be leaning on each other. So when you were out of sorts, I could pray that he would touch Beverly to be more receptive to my craziness, or she could pray that I would change and really see her views. And often it was that whole dynamic of it takes three to be married. And I truly believe that.
Yeah.
And I think that's been a very major part of our life, that the whole faith experience has been central to everything we did. And especially, as I said, after my career, it's like, wow, that was important. But if you think I'm really worried now about what was the most important to me 25 years ago, making the next promotion, it's like it didn't even happen.
Yeah.
But
I remember when my wife and I got married, we're married 9 years next week. And I remember when we got married, I said, you know what's crazy? When we think between now and old age, God willing, we both get there, nothing in our lives will be the same except for each other. Like we're the only common denominator
You're
through every
right.
phase. Because we'll have kids, and then they'll move out.
Right.
And we'll, buy a house, and then eventually we'll sell it, and then I'll have a job, and then I won't, and whatever. But the only common thread between all of this is us. I mean, that I think helps highlight how important that relationship is. And if there's anything that's getting in the way, you have to remove that factor or overcome it in some way, because nothing would be more important.
But from a theological point of view, which I learned later, in particular in graduate school, the idea is that every human being, like everything, has a purpose. I think Thomas Aquinas talked about that. And the purpose of the human being is to be in heaven with God.
Right.
That's our purpose. Therefore, the purpose of marriage is to get yourself, your spouse, your children and grandchildren, etc., to heaven. Mm-hmm. And that takes precedent over everything. Yeah. And as you get older, you see that. The other thing that's so interesting is when you're young and finances are important, and it is, and you're looking at the cost of children, and they're expensive. But when you try to manage it, and you try to regulate it, and you try to make these decisions, you can't see what God can see. And often when we first gave the Conference Engage, we would bring pictures of our three children when they were 6 months old. So we have 3 beautiful baby pictures. And we described those 3. Today, our oldest is a professor of genetics, molecular biologist, tenured professor at University of Kansas. Our daughter was a Fairfax County school teacher until she homeschooled for 10 years and got 3 kids 2 years early into college. Wow. And now she's a DRE. And our youngest was a DRE, and now he's an accounting manager at a private school in Alexandria.
Wow.
And he had been 8 years at a big school down in D.C. And he had also been, as I mentioned, a DRE. And so it's truly amazing that God could see those children where they are today when we were family planning. Mm-hmm. So the idea of openness to God's plan should be understood, that he has a wonderful plan if you allow him to be there for those decisions. And it doesn't mean you have to have every child you're biologically capable, but this idea of I know what's best. The worst time I could have had children was being deployed as a combat infantryman to Vietnam, 2 tours. Yeah. And that's when our first 2 children were born. Wow. And look at them today. So trust in the Lord, trust in God.
Yeah.
He has a plan.
Yeah.
It won't always be easy, but it'll be worth it.
It
right?
is,
Exactly,
absolutely.
exactly. And then it was 10 years between our second and third. We had 3 miscarriages, and
I'm sorry.
so that was hard. But we were so tickled with this last one, and then we moved to this area. And when we moved here, he was 3 years old, and 4 years old, and we read the parish bulletin that said Catholic Charities needed foster parents for babies, newborn babies. And I kept thinking, he doesn't know what it's like to have a baby, a young one.
And he was a very complicated delivery, and Beverly could never have children after that
Yeah.
again. But
So
we thought Mom would want it. She wants to do that. Yeah, that'll be
So
her
when I
thing.
said, wouldn't that be great to do? And they said, oh, yeah, everybody was, yeah. Well, then when I got the call that we were getting a baby, they were all excited. And
Yeah.
we were able to have 18 foster babies.
Over
but
7
Over
years.
7
Oh, my
years, but we had
heavens,
2
wonderful.
sets of twins. It was just, our
It was
whole
amazing.
family fell in love with each one of those children. It was hard. Every time we'd give up one, we'd say,
Yeah.
we're not doing this again. And then Catholic Charities would call me about 3 months later, and they'd say, we've got, And then when I had the first set of twins, they'd never had twins before, so then they called me up when they got the second set, and they said, did you get rid of the stroller? Because I bought a stroller.
Double stroller,
and everything.
two
I said,
high
I've got
chairs, all
everything.
that stuff.
And they said, would you like to have another set of twins?
Oh,
And I
yeah.
said, yes.
The Catholic Church waited 3 months because I figured that's how long it takes to regain your sanity and your sleep.
But it was a wonderful, and that sort of ties into another thing I'd sort of like to mention. If you're open to the Holy Spirit,
Yeah.
He will give you options to do things that you may not have thought
Never.
you planned to do.
Right.
So we first started out teaching CCD, and then we did a marriage encounter, and that really helped us focus on doing everything as a couple instead of married single activities, which happens after marriage if you're not careful. So then we did the conference and the engaged, and the next thing we were foster parents, and then we became DREs, and one thing after another was offered, and it prayerfully looked at it. It's just made our whole life so rich. And today, to have the opportunity to teach RCIA or to teach the Bible study is so rich because, and then, like I said, went to graduate school. All of those things are by having a willingness to listen to a calling for a particular thing, particularly within the church, and figuring that God will give you the time to do it and doing it. And it's really made our married life very, very rich because we've constantly been able
Doing
to
things
share
as a couple, and I think
Yeah.
that's,
with the
that's
church.
the thing that has really been so beneficial. And now we watch our family doing the same thing.
We got a question on Instagram from Lily Bell. It goes along these lines. And it says, do you ever get bored with each other? I think people hear 55 years, and like, if you haven't been married for very long, you might think, well, how could we, want to be with the same person for 55 years? So do you ever get bored?
No.
No.
Well,
Bob seems like he keeps it interesting, keeps you hopping.
It does go to that interesting side, and we were thinking about and when you're married an awful long time, you don't always like the person. Love is a decision of the will. You make a decision of the will. One of the things we talk about in Conference of the Engaged is marriage is not 50-50. Today, a lot of people
Yeah.
think, okay, you made breakfast, I'll take the trash out. You burnt my toast, well, then you have to take the trash out. It's not that. It's 100% gift of
Yeah.
one to the other. So I give 100%, she gives 100%. And that makes the marriage go. But to love a person is a decision of the will. It's not a feeling, it's not an emotion. You can't fall into love and fall out of love. You can choose to love and you can choose not to love. But it doesn't mean that you like the person all the time. So you
Yeah.
can have an issue, you can have a moment, you can have a frustration where you really don't like. I know many times Prince Charming has disappointed Beverly and she hasn't liked it. But we choose to love, and that gets us through those hard times because it truly is a decision of the will. And if you're on that triangle, you get through those times through prayer. So it's
Yeah, we got a question from Nick that says, how do you know if you're in love with someone? And I got the same question one time. I gave a talk to young men at the Quo Vadis retreat. So these guys who are open to the call to the priesthood, but someone comes in and gives a talk about, married life and, religious life and these kinds of things. And so I had my answer, but you pretty much answered it there. What's the difference between being in love and love? And I think it's that sacrificial side. When you're infatuated with somebody or something like that, it's about they're relating to something you want. They're expressing character traits or interests that you're like, wow, that would be great, but it's really thinking about yourself. I always felt like being in love is when you're suddenly you're switching, your thinking switches, and it's, I want to make her happy forever. Absolutely. I want to serve her. I want to, and then obviously if it's a healthy relationship, she's doing the same in return, and we're serving each other.
Love is to work for the good of the other.
That's very good. Yeah.
One of the things I want to mention about love, it's really interesting that having studied the Bible for a long, long time, and I don't have enough Greek to know, but a priest gave this story once, and I just think it is so relative to marriage. In biblical Greek, there's at least three, more than three, but there are three major words for love. And in English, we say love. So I can love chocolate ice cream. I can love my job. I can love my car. I can love Beverly. I can love my children. But in Greek, there was three. And the way this is so significant is that in the story of Jesus meeting Peter after the resurrection, everybody knows Peter denied him 3 times. And Jesus asked him 3 times, you love me? And Peter says, Lord, I love you. And 3 times he answers, and everybody says, you hear homilies about it, and they're not wrong, that Peter was being called to remember that he had walked away from Jesus 3 times. But in reality, in the Greek, they use 2 of the 3 words. Now, the first word is eros, and eros is that physical desire, that physicalness that brings you together, attracts you in the beginning, that's all part of the first many years of your marriage and often resulting in children. So that eros is wonderful. The second is philia, Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love. That's brotherly love. And as an Army officer, there is philios, particularly in units, small units, when you've survived danger together. Yeah. Combat's one, parachuting is another, all those kinds of things. You develop a bond between those brothers. The third one is agape. And agape is to give your life for the person. Now, in the Greek, that story, Jesus asked Peter, do you agape me? And Peter responds, knowing what he had just done, no, Lord. He doesn't say no. He just said, Lord, I philia you. And Jesus asked him the second time, Peter, do you agape me? And Peter said, Lord, I philia you. And the third time, Jesus consents to that and said, Peter,
wait a
you
minute,
philia me.
I noticed what you're doing here. You're trying to get out of the sacrificial side.
And he said, yes, I philia you. And then it goes on to say, later, someone will bind your hands and you will do things. And so he was crucified upside down, and he did get to agape.
Right.
But the reason I'm saying that is marriage has all 3.
Yeah.
And you shift in and out. How many times you've heard a person say, I married my best friend. I spent my whole life with my best friend. Well, that's philia. It's wonderful. Yeah. And eros is certainly there. Agape is a little less frequent, but you truly do get more agape as you get older. The longer you're married, the more you're focusing on the true person that you're married to and the willingness to do anything, as you said, for that person. And I really think that's important for people to realize that the English doesn't do it justice. And I did have the extraordinary privilege, sadly, to go to the White House and see the President of the United States award the Congressional Medal of Honor to one of my troops from Vietnam who threw himself on a hand grenade to save his best friend. Now that is the ultimate act of agape. Yeah. They were philia, but
and it seems like in marriage, I mean, like war, I guess, that bond is formed stronger through challenge and through the struggles of marriage. Yes. And, so in communication, we talk about a crisis. Yeah. I always think of a crisis as 2 things. It's a mixture of risk and opportunity. Right. Well, the risk of a challenge in marriage is that it could drive you apart. Yes. The opportunity is that it could also bind you closer together. My wife and I have had some of those experiences and just things that happened, especially with a really challenging first pregnancy, and she was sick and she couldn't work, so we're down to one salary. So all these things spiraled, and she was basically bedridden for almost 9 months. So it created all this opportunity where if we were going the 50-50 route, I'd say, hey, you got quite a bill here.
That's right.
Well,
That's right.
that's not what marriage is. That's not the way it works. Yeah, that was obviously brutal time for her, but it was me just all I did was pour out. That was a wonderful opportunity for us. There was a lot of risk in that, and some marriages don't survive those kinds of things.
That's it.
But we were blessed. God was good and graceful to us, and we came out of it stronger because of it. But a lot of marriages, especially right now, there's a sense of once the 50-50 is, once the bill's too big, we cut you off, and
you're out of here.
So what do you think when you look and you see in society, people that are, divorce is happening at young. I mean, I know folks that have divorced after 2 or 3 years. I'm like, you're just getting started. Like you barely know each other at that point. What are your thoughts when you see that? What are your maybe solutions or advice if someone is in that position? What do you say?
Well, go ahead. Do you want to?
No. Go,
one of the things that we talk about in the Conference of Engage is, and we've had a situation like that in our family, so it was a very difficult thing for us to go through here. We were involved in marriage encounter and all this sort of thing. But the first thing most people seek is professional marriage counseling, and there's nothing wrong. There are some wonderful professional marriage counselors, and they can do a lot to help you. But their objective is often to find fault or to identify or decide. My recommendation is to go to a priest. And you say, well, a priest isn't married. Well, a priest hears more about marriage in the confessional than any counselor will ever hear in his life.
Yeah.
And his interest is saving your marriage. So when you're having the normal difficulties, if you can't work them out, the best thing to do is to seek a priest that you love and trust, maybe a young priest, and go to him and ask him to be a counselor and to talk to you and give you spiritual guidance and ways to do that. And often you can get through a hurdle because love is synonymous with suffering. They really are. Those crises you had, we've had all 4 of our parents die. That was a very difficult thing. And the deployments and all those kinds of things. I also wanted to mention earlier when you say about the deployments, the wonderful thing about the deployment is after each one is like starting a honeymoon all over again.
Yeah.
And it also regulates your family very nicely. We call it Army Natural Family Planning. It just spaces them out in a beautiful spacing. But coming back, so you have those good things. And I've often seen in peers that those deployments strengthen many marriages, as ours, and destroy others. And
military marriages do seem to be, assuming they make it, they do seem to be uniquely strong, and they're also have a sense of independence. It's not like they couldn't function without the other, but they just don't want to.
Right.
And it seems very healthy.
Right.
But, I was going to say the other thing is every once in a while, we've a couple of times had a priest ask us if we wouldn't mind talking to a couple.
Oh, yeah.
In crisis.
And I think that's really important too, but our first reaction is really go to a priest, not necessarily a counselor. Not that we have anything against counselors, but we really think a priest is the best guidance. And then many times a priest will say, why don't you talk to this couple? They've been
have
married
a mentor couple, an older couple that can mentor.
I've heard of
through.
priests doing that.
Yes.
So a priest friend of mine one time, this is early in my work for the church, he had just, expressed frustration that, sometimes people feel like they can't go to a priest for counseling. I said, let me put it this way. I said, I'm a 2-time cancer survivor. I said, none of my doctors ever went through cancer, but they've seen 1 million people with what I have, and they notice trends. They see what goes wrong, and and they can help you treat it. Now, when you're having a bad day because you have cancer, the doctor's not going to help you much. That's where an actual a brother or sister who's had cancer will help you, emotionally through that. But if you want to identify some of the challenges, go to the people that see those things in the confessional and in settings with couples every single day. This is what they do. This is why they became a priest.
Right.
Exactly.
He was like, that's good. That analogy was like, I'm going to use that on oncology
that
analogy.
That is very good.
But it's so true, and our priests do have such wisdom from seeing so many people.
They do.
Another kind of strange phenomenon that we see in culture, I think more now than before, is people that would get divorced at 20 and 30 years. When you think you've weathered the worst that is thrown at you through children and all the just natural challenges that come with that. When you see that, what do you think, or do you notice anything that maybe contributes to that kind of thing.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I'm always amazed when I do find out something like that, and it's heartbreaking for me because I look at somebody that's, that I think is happy and then find out that they're not.
It's often imperceptible. You're right. It's not like it's obvious to people like,
No.
oh, something's going on there. They're
No.
hiding it well.
Yeah.
But it's more the communication aspect of it. As I said, we grew in our faith together. We went to graduate school together. We had the foster babies together. And if you don't have married activities, if you don't have a married focus in the things that you do on a daily basis, then you get drawn apart. I remember sitting on a plane with a guy one time, and he went through that exact thing. And he said, I met this girl, we dated, we fell in love. She helped me get through graduate school. We had all this, and then I went off on my career over here, and now I'm surrounded by bright, beautiful girls who know all the stuff that I know, and she's stuck over here, say like just being a housewife and mother. So we don't have anything in common anymore. Wow. And you go 30 years, you get all the children through and out, and then what are you going to do with your life? We don't have that problem. As I said, I teach, and God bless her, Beverly faithfully comes to all my classes. Beverly supports my classes. Beverly does things for my students. Beverly is very involved in correcting my papers and looking at my slides. And I mean, it's a couple thing that we do. And I'm afraid that so many people drift apart. It's very subtle. It starts slowly, and then someday you wake up and you say, "Well, we just don't have anything in common."
That's
very,
exactly.
very
So I remember talking with a priest friend about that same thing because he had mentioned a couple or something that had gone through this, and he says that the distractions of parenthood can really kind of mask issues and communications in the relationship, and you're so distracted and pulled apart because driving the kids to soccer and this, that when they're gone and it's just the two of you, you realize you don't know each other anymore. Right. Mm-hmm. Right. And so it's hard, but I think parents, young parents, I've got 3 kids. They're the oldest is in kindergarten, so we had them real close together. Basically 3 kids in 4 years, and it is distracting. It's hard, but we have to be very deliberate about spending time together and in the evenings, not just letting the TV guide the night. That we sit and talk and communicate. If you don't, little by little, over time, I mean, I think the devil works that way too.
Absolutely.
Just
I
helps you
do
drift
too.
apart.
I was going to say that one of the things we used to always do is what we called walking talks. Every night after dinner, the 2 of us would go out. The kids would be playing, doing their things, and they were older.
Or we'd take them,
and
if they're young, we'd take them
the
in
young ones we'd take with us. But we'd always, every night, go out for what we call the walking talk. And the other thing that I think is important is we decided quite early on that we would do things together. Like, I didn't go one place with the gals when he went someplace there. We
found
pretty
activities
much-
that you could do as a couple.
We always did activities as a couple, and that started right
Right from
from the very beginning.
And like you said, that carries you through when years later you don't have the same career, the kids are out of the house, but you're still doing things together, and
Exactly.
it feeds that.
Yeah.
Any kind of final advice if you had a couple and you're in an elevator and you could just offer them one bit of advice before you hop off? What would you say?
I would say center everything on your faith. Trust in God. Trust in the Holy Spirit. What the church provide for us is truth. It's veritas. You can take it to the bank. Jesus knew what he was talking about, and there's no greater love than what he did, the ultimate agape. And it's your lifelong objective to fall in love with him, and hopefully to be in heaven with him and your spouse. So you do that together. You bring each other along. Don't lose faith for the material world. That's what I would say about it.
Wonderful.
I think that's very good. I think the communication is really the key to staying together. I think people drift apart when they're off doing other things and not really talking each day. I think that communication is the most important thing.
Wonderful.
Really.
I'm so grateful you all shared your story. I mean, 55 years of marriage. We've got to listen when we hear that kind of success. And you're obviously faithful and joyful. You're not, worn out soldiers from 55 years of marriage. You're joyful. It's almost like you just got married a year or two ago, the way you express that joy.
I was going to say the other thing, too, is we never go to bed without praying before we go to
Yeah,
bed. And we do
you've
that.
offered some great
Yeah.
tips, and I think that's high up there. That's very high up there. Again, thank you so much for your story and your testimony, and for all the volunteering that you do and sharing scripture and spirituality, and your work with the Conference for the Engaged. Thank you.
Well, Thank you. We're
Thank you for
glad that
inviting us.
people would invite us to do that.
You're listening to Searching for More. If you enjoyed this podcast, please write a review on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, Spotify, or wherever you listen. Also, make sure you follow the Diocese and the Arlington Catholic Herald on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And subscribe to our YouTube channels for regular videos that inspire, educate, and inform about the Catholic faith in our diocesan community.